One of the things that was so interesting to me about this topic when it was presented to me was the idea of healthcare and mental health care in particular. And we've talked about that on this program before, but I hadn't ever really thought about it at the intersection of physical and mental health care and a changing climate. Now, I sort of expected to get into a pretty academic and research based conversation, but as I did the research for this show and conducted the interview and then reflected on it, it occurred to me that there is an awful lot of anxiety around the world and even in our own backyards, in our own families about climate, but we don't think of it that way, right? We don't think about the anxieties that we have having anything to do with these broader global issues. Somehow we put our anxieties into little micro categories in our own life, and we don't connect them to the broader issues of our society and our culture and our community that might be making them worse. So let me give you an example. I have a number of colleagues and friends and people I've known over the years who have real anxiety about big weather events. Some of them have been through some bad storms as kids or in another time in their life where they did lose everything. They lost a home in a tornado. They lost property in a hurricane. They experienced drought that wiped out their agricultural output for the year. And they have grown up with a lot of anxiety around severe weather, flooding, storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, winter weather events that unfortunately can cut off communities in some parts of the world where the weather gets bad enough long enough. Losing power, losing electricity in the modern world is a huge inconvenience and causes real problems for people in big and small ways. And even in more routine weather events, I have talked to so many folks in the United States, in the Midwest, where we are known for our severe weather, who have real anxiety on those days when there are severe storms in the forecast or there's potential flooding in the forecast because they've seen it and they've experienced it, and they're worried about what it means for their home, what it means for their family, what it means for their safety. Those who work in agriculture, who have farms and ranches, and they have seen extreme weather severely impact their family's ability to continue on with that agricultural work. And then others who maybe are a little more disconnected from the events, but they worry about their family member who lives in a severe weather zone, or they worry about their kids and what kind of planet that they're going to have. I never really thought about this from the perspective of mental health and anxiety, but when you step back and think about all the people in your life who express concerns and worries about things that in the end can be tied back to our climate and our weather, it's pretty breathtaking. And it is soaking up a lot more of our mental space now than it feels like it ever did before. So I invite you all to read more about Svetlana's work. It's very Africa-centric, and so if you don't live in that part of the world or you don't have direct ties there, it's still accessible. It's still something you can take what's happening in that part of the world and make it relevant to your daily life. But I do think it's important that we all focus a little bit more on what's happening in parts of the world that we don't think about, because it is an interconnected planet in more ways than we always appreciate. So one of the goals I have on this show is to remind us of that. I'm not asking you to subscribe to every newsletter that covers the African economy or culture or social issues, but I am suggesting that we take time to think about the parts of the world that we don't see covered in traditional media on a regular basis. There is more to this story of healthcare and climate than what we have in the US or Canada, the UK or Australia, the nations of the Northern Hemisphere, and even as we think about the Southern Hemisphere, the experiences of climate in India are different than those in the Middle East, which are different than those in North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa and South Africa and throughout Latin America. Each of these deserves their own time and consideration, and how we as a global community have to address these challenges because we are all interconnected through travel, through trade, through education, and increasingly through media, including platforms like this. It is a global community. We have to start thinking about it in that context. And conversations like this, I hope, are valuable in advancing the ideas of people who are trying to make their communities a little bit better, one step at a time. The other final point I wanted to make on this topic, specifically the intersection of healthcare and climate. I have been concerned for a long time that an interconnected warming planet is a place that is more prone to infectious diseases. The issue of COVID-19 aside, many of us remember there was a period where we weren't sure how the Ebola virus was evolving in Africa and if it was becoming more contagious and easier to spread across the world. And we actually had a patient who came to the United States a number of years ago, and it refocused this nation's attention on infectious diseases, their spread, where they're originating, and how they're treated. And then once again, it faded to the background. We didn't spend a lot of time in this show on the infectious disease topic because I didn't want to bog down that conversation with scientific laboratory talk. But I do think it's another topic that reminds us how interconnected the world is. And as I think about guests to bring on in future episodes, having that conversation around infectious diseases, I think, is very, very important. The African continent as a whole, with its diversity of people, climates, and environments, has always been an easy ground for any sort of new infectious disease to quickly develop and make its way into the human population, just as much as we see in other parts of the world like China, where we did see COVID-19 emerge, or in India, where we have very, very large populations of people living in very close quarters. Any new infectious disease would be very easy to move through the population. But increasingly, wherever it starts, these things can move very, very quickly around the world. And the warmer the climate is, the easier it will be for these infectious diseases to exist in the air and to move about populations. So not a topic necessarily for this day, but if we think about the intersection of healthcare needs, healthcare infrastructure, and a planet that's likely to need more of it to deal with the things that have largely been suppressed over the last 100 years. Infectious diseases used to kill huge numbers of people. They don't have nearly the effect anymore. But if we have a warming planet and we have more movements of people and we have more opportunity for those viruses to make the jump and then to have an environment that's conducive to their spread, then unfortunately we may be looking at a world that has more infectious diseases that we have to deal with. And do we really have an international healthcare apparatus or even national level healthcare apparatus to deal with emerging diseases when we're already struggling with those that are among us and the non-infectious diseases of mental health challenges and mental health care?